iPad Pros are here, iPad Airs are here, Apple even has a new Magic Keyboard, and a crazy rotating, vibrating pencil, which I held in my hand. Let's get into it. Apple finally has new iPads. We've been waiting for these for over a year, but if you were looking for something more affordable, this may not be your point, because these iPads are the fancy pads. These are expensive. I mean, there are the iPad Airs and the iPad Pros. The iPad Airs are actually not too bad. They start at $600 and $800 for a new 13-inch model. But the iPad Pro is expensive. It's either $1,000 or $1,300 just for the starting configuration, which has 256 gigabytes of storage. Who is that for? That is a very good question. The iPad Pro has always been a fancy, beautiful device. The new iPad Pro is thinner, it has a better processor, and it has a really cool new Pro Pencil. The thinner part is what Apple calls the mission to make this feel a little better in your bag. I mean, Apple's always looking at a super thin device. Did you really need an even thinner iPad? But with the Magic Keyboard on, which has become a heavy and thick prospect if you have an iPad Pro or iPad Air from previously, the new combo should feel lighter and thinner than before. There is a new Magic Keyboard for this new iPad Pro as well, because it has a slightly different dimension. This Magic Keyboard is aluminum on the inside, so it kind of feels like those bridge keyboards that I played with in the past, but it still tilts out in that kind of floating way that the Magic Keyboard did before, which means you cannot fold it into a folio. You kind of open it up like a laptop and then tilt it kind of like an iMac. There's a new row of function keys on it, and it feels really nice, and it's got a haptic response on the trackpad. The price is about the same as the previous Magic Keyboard. And the Apple Pencil Pro is a stylus that works on both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro models, which has a bunch of new features that are pretty fantastic. The Apple Pencil Pro is the same price as the Pencil 2 before, but now it has vibrating haptics inside and a little squeeze function. Maybe if you're a Samsung user, you've been used to some things like this on their styluses, but if you give a little squeeze, it'll bring up a little curved menu that allows you then to tap and click little things to control things like brushes. The ability to rotate through a built-in gyro brings up the ability to use these rotatable brushes, and it's a lot more useful than you think. For calligraphy or for tools that have again, like a certain brush shape, you can actually tilt them and control them, and it was pretty fantastic in my demo. I don't see any reason why you wouldn't want to get that, especially at the price not being too high for the Pencil Pro. But of course, you're going to need a new iPad to take advantage of that. One of the Airs or one of the Pros, which I don't think is worth it for a lot of people for the total cost element, but I like this feature. Now, what do you get? The iPad Air or the iPad Pro? They're both nice and they're both upgraded. The iPad Air is actually the iPad Pro from 2022 in a lot of ways. It's got an 11-inch or a new 13-inch screen. It also has that near-field responsiveness, so if you bring a pencil close to it, you can hover and it'll bring up menus before the pencil taps down. And if you're using a Pencil Pro, that allows you to basically turn and look at the brush tools before it hits. It's pretty useful. The iPad Air also has an M2 processor, which is the same processor that was on the iPad Pro back in 2022. The iPad Air has a liquid retina display, which means it doesn't have mini LED or OLED. It doesn't have a faster refresh rate on its display, and it doesn't have Face ID, and also doesn't have LiDAR, which are things that you might use occasionally or for things like AR. But it does have a new position camera on the landscape edge. So does the iPad Pro. Thank God. These are the things that were on the 10th generation iPad that make it really great when you dock with a keyboard and have normal looking non-off-center video chats. I really like the iPad Air for its proposition because I liked everything spec-wise that was in the iPad Pro before. The iPad Pro now has an M4 chip, which is a brand new chip that Apple says is even better for things like processing and AI. It's really hard to tell, though, what that's going to be used for. Some of my colleagues suggested a lot of its specs sound like the M3 chip, which skipped being on the iPads. Apple is also talking about how this is more power efficient and is used to run a brand new display, because that OLED display is called a tandem OLED display, and it actually boasts brighter colors, brighter nits, like a 1600 maximum nit for HDR, and basically looking super crisp and super great. There's also a new matte display option on these iPad Pros, which I do appreciate. But the proposition for buying an iPad Pro is going to run you a lot of money. You could easily go $1,500 or $2,000 or who knows what. And are the apps going to be there to use that? It's not a Mac stand-in, but it's getting closer and closer to feeling almost like it could be. And it's up to Apple to decide if it's going to. I mean, WWDC is coming. Maybe we'll see that. My favorite iPad that got announced in some ways is the fact that the 10th gen iPad dropped to $350. Dropping the price on that iPad, which has already been pretty good, makes it a really great go-to for a lot of people and a great budget choice. I think it's definitely the one to get. We'll wait and see how we feel about these other ones. Stay tuned for a full review, and I'm going to get to use them more and see how I feel about iPads 2024.